Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons, and specifically I want to talk about We Love TTRPGs incredibly freighted short about playing 1980s OSR games, right? And you could see, and link below, and you could see his short. And essentially, I'm making a video for almost every sentence in this short because I'm really fascinated. One, I think this guy's a good actor, right? Like he's coming. There's a term for it, like I think good actor is about as close as I'll get, but a fair play agent, right? Like he's coming forward and he's saying, hey, you should play OSR 80s games, right? And there's nothing unusual about that. There's a bunch of old grognards saying you should play this 80s game. But he's being intellectually honest about it, right? And so that's what warrants this like deep dive on his short. So check out his short, but I'll give you the line that we're going to cover today. He said, none of these OSR 80s games were meant to endorse bad behavior, right? Now, and I've already listed what the bad behavior was. Like, for instance, objectifying women. Like, if you read an OSR 80s game, there's a good chance there's going to be some there's going to be objectifying women. There's going to be a lack of representation. There's going to be and the objectification part is going to be bikini armor and a whole bunch of other things. There's just a lot of there's bad behavior written into these books, right? And what he's saying is that these games weren't written to endorse bad behavior. Now, I'll give him that at 90%, right? So I think, all these OSR, there's a ton of these, there's actually not hundreds, there were dozens of these significant OSR 80s tabletop role-playing games. And I think 90% of the designers, they wanted to make a good tabletop role-playing game. But some of them were bad guys, right? Some of them were like, this objectifying women is in here not because it's 80s, but because I'm a jerk, right? So I don't think you can say that like across the board. You can say that at the macro level, but I definitely think there's some really shady stuff you're going to find in those old games that was meant to endorse bad behavior. But let's keep moving because he's got so let's grant his point at 90%, right? So one, I would warn you to say, hey, take a look. Like, was this guy, was this here because this is a product made in the 80s, or was this here because this guy was a creeper, man? Like, and was just not a good person, right? And I think generally you can find that out on a lot of these games, right? And the weird thing is, so here's my point though, right? And this is what I'm saying is, don't waste 1 minute with some 1980s game, right? He's wrong, right? And here's why. When you pick up that OSR game today, and he talked about two specifically, he talks about two on his channel, Marvel and Star Wars, right? And he's like, hey, play these old 80s OSR games, right? Because they weren't meant to endorse bad behavior. But my issue is, dude, wait, both these games you could play right now with current versions that have fixed all that bad behavior, right? So, so basically the way characters are drawn, representation issues, LGBTQ issues, so he's saying, hey, play this 80s version of the Star Wars game. Play this 80s version of the Marvel Multiverse role-playing game. First of all, if you want to play Star Wars, Fantasy Flight Games is sitting right there with literally 50 books. And that's not an exaggeration. I think there's literally 50 books in that system. Marvel Multiverse role-playing game has a brand new, astonishingly good system, right? And so my point is, why on earth should you be out here and the moment you skip the current versions and you go to these 80s versions that have LGBTQ preference issues, that have gender representation issues, that have gender issues, LGBTQ, that have gender I want to say representation, but they have problems across these axes: gender, LGBTQ, and representation, right? And other issues, right? So the second you say, hey, I'm going to go dig in the bin and pull out this 80s version and ignore the fact that both of these games have phenomenal, highly available, completely updated versions of the game, then wait, are you now endorsing bad behavior? And my answer is yes, right? If you're pointing, like, and if either, like, the games he's pointing to have active good versions right now, right? Like, so the second you go pull out some crusty thing and blow the dust off the cover and present it to somebody in your group, right, you absolutely are endorsing bad behavior. You're saying, I would rather play this game with LGBT, with problem accesses on LGBTQ, gender, representation, and other issues than deal with my foibles for whatever these systems have. Dude, that is endorsing bad behavior, right? You might have an excuse if your game was out of print, but that's not the case. The games he's looking at, he's telling you, please ignore the completely updated versions of these games that have taken this bad behavior out. And here's my point. The moment you do that, you absolutely are endorsing the bad behavior. You're going out of your way to get it, right? It's much harder to get these games. They're much more expensive, right? In order to get, like, the Marvel Multiverse role-playing game from back then, it's difficult to find good copies, right? Whereas these other games, you could buy them off the shelf right now, right? And so that's the issue. Is I think, he is being intellectually honest, but where he's coming up with this idea that you're not endorsing bad behavior when you purposely choose to not use the current versions and use these old ones, you absolutely are, And I would warn you against this, because the reality is you're going to draw people who are looking for it. They're going, ooh, do you have a game where I can, where no LGBTQ people will show up, where women are going to be scantily clad in the illustrations? Do you have something where I don't need to deal with seeing minorities very much? Right? It's not good. It's really not good, right? That's my take there on his line that these games were not meant to endorse bad behavior. My contention is that if you are going out of your way to play these 80s versions of games that have now versions that are dramatically better in every single way, in quality of product, in art, in writing, in layout, in rules, and certainly in representing LGBTQ, the correct genders, minorities, marginalized groups, then you are endorsing bad behavior, in my humble opinion. Every single word you just heard is my humble opinion. The important part is when I get to hear your humble opinion, when you get in the comments and send your traffic. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a fetch millennium.